All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Friday. Thank you for being here. You all look lovely. It's quite beautiful outside, isn't it? Gorgeous. No? Yeah? Gorgeous, gorgeous. Um, so today what we'll do is I will talk a little bit more about this oppression, prejudice, discrimination, stereotype stuff. I'll give you your quizzes back before the end of class, maybe right before the end of class, and we'll review them quickly. And then, yeah, and then I will set you free for your weekend, although I know you've got other classes, but
What do you think about the quiz?
what do I think about it?
How's the score?
I've got to put them into my Excel spreadsheet and kind of average them out. I think they were pretty good. Like I think the overall average was better than it has been for the last little while, so that was encouraging. You guys did better than students have been doing for the past few terms, so I liked that. I don't know. Maybe you'll be happy with your mark and maybe you won't. I don't know. I mean, if you want 100% and you get 94, you might not be happy, right? But if you're just trying to pass and you get a 65, you might. I don't know, right? Everyone's standard's different, but I thought it was a good showing. I thought I wasn't concerned, but we'll see if you're happy or not.
So overall good.
What's that?
So overall it's good.
Overall, I think it was all right. Yeah, I think it was good. Yeah. I know that was cryptic and not as clear as you wanted it to be, but you know what I'm saying, right? Like, yeah, some students are dissatisfied with a 95, and some students, if they pass, they're like, yes. What can I say? Okay, let's jump in here. So, where were we? Oh yeah, so we had talked about stereotype, prejudice, and discrimination, right? It's kind of a knowledge, a feeling, and an action. I gave you this dog example. And actually, I kind of like this picture. I just grabbed a picture of a dog from the internet. I don't know who this dog is. But he's actually a pretty good dog, because I think he's a good dog. He's a good dog because I think if you look at him, you could see both things, right? He does look kind of cute and cuddly, but also he's not the kind of dog that you would want to be mad at you, right? Yeah, this one could kind of go either way, right? He's a big teddy bear, or look out. Yeah, so we talked about all that, and just at the end of that, I was talking to you about people expressing prejudice freely, sometimes because they believe their prejudice is fact, right? That it's based in fact. And so I said that, decades ago, people would freely express their prejudices against black people in the United States and against indigenous people here in Canada. And they would express it because, well, they thought everyone else felt the same, but also because they thought it was true, right? They thought it was based in fact, right? So white people in the United States in the past freely expressed their prejudice against black people because they actually thought black people were less than them, right? They thought they were less intelligent, less kind of moral or ethical, less hardworking. And so, it was normal, it was understandable to discriminate against people who were not as good as you, right? So they freely expressed their prejudices, right? But again, in part, their prejudices were, supported by the fact that they existed. You know what I mean? No, you don't know what I mean. But think about it, what if in Jane Elliott's class, what if she actually was like, oh man, I hate teaching blue-eyed kids. They're so slow, right? They don't do well on their tests, they're always late. Ugh, I hate blue-eyed kids in my class, right? But interestingly enough, the stereotype that she introduced into the class is actually what is responsible for that situation in the first place, right? So she released her prejudice into the class kind of fulfilled that prejudice or that stereotype, and then she's like, oh man, so many blue-eyed kids this year. This is going to be so difficult, right? And it's like, no, your prejudice created the situation, and now you're expressing your prejudice because you think it's fact, right? But it's not fact, right? Blue-eyed kids are not less smart than other kids, but you've created a situation where they're struggling, right? Where they're disadvantaged, and then you're getting upset, or you're expressing your prejudice because you think it's fact, but it's really not. Does that make sense? Yeah. So we talked a little bit about Tess Holliday here yesterday, right? And people expressing their prejudice against people who are overweight or obese, right? And for Tess here, we said, and I'm not sure I really want to dive too far into this yet. I want to save it for the sexism unit. But for Tess, I think it's even more. It's even more kind of a sharp criticism, because there's often so much attention on women's appearance, right? Women's looks and women's bodies. So here, Tess is kind of modeling for this cover, but her appearance is, I guess, up for comment, right? And people like Piers Morgan can, freely criticize how she looks in the name of health, right? But I think as we talked yesterday, I think we all kind of agreed, and I think I agree too. I'm not 100% on this, but I think I kind of agree that he's expressing a prejudice, right? He's making a judgment about Tess. He thinks that there's something wrong about her, right? He's criticizing how she is, not how she looks, but how she is, and he's wrapping it up with, oh, I'm just concerned about her health, right? And I don't think he is, right? I really don't think he is. I think he's used to seeing, skinny models on the front of this magazine. He sees a not skinny model, and he has a reaction, right? And we'll talk about that very shortly. That's an interesting point, because this will come up later today. The idea that often our stereotypes are triggered when we see someone who doesn't fit who we expect them to be, okay? And so I'm going to press pause on that, and I'm going to try to remember that point, because we're going to see it come up very shortly again, okay? We have stereotypes about people and about groups of people, but also in some cases who we expect people to be, right? And in this case, we expect to see a slim or a skinny model on the cover of Cosmo. And here we don't, right? And that causes people to stop, right? And suddenly they look at her differently, right? They look at Tess differently. Do you think people question the health of all the other models on the front of Cosmo? Do you think anyone ever thinks about that? Probably not, right? Probably not. Maybe if someone was like really, really slim, they might be like, oh my gosh, is this girl eating enough? Like this doesn't look good. But nobody really questions the health of any of these other models. And yet for Tess, people see something they don't expect, and it starts to trigger stereotypes. I have a better example of that. I'll explain it shortly, okay? The other thing that's kind of worth pointing out here is the sort of very idea of beauty, right? And how do we determine what's beautiful, right? How do we know if I put up a picture of a really good-looking woman or a really good-looking guy on the screen, what kind of determines, how do we know what's attractive? How do we know hot or not?
Through their physical body.
Yeah, what about it though? I'm gonna suggest here, and if I'm wrong, tell me, Mike, you're wrong. But it's kind of just something you know, right? Don't you just kind of look at someone and like, hot or not, right? Swipe left or swipe right, right? It's a pretty simple thing, right? You just kind of look and you're like, yeah, or no, or maybe. But it's a pretty quick, instinctive decision, isn't it? You don't really have to think very hard usually, right? You don't have to like get out your paper and do the math. Are they hot? Carry the 1, divide by 7. Doesn't work like that, right? You just kind of, you know. right? And again, I think that's because we have absorbed many, many social messages about what attractiveness is, right? What does it mean for a man to be attractive? What does it mean for a woman to be attractive? Society has kind of taught us this, right? And so now, very instinctively, when we see someone, we can judge them hot or not, right? For the most part. Sometimes I know, society might, not think someone is particularly attractive, but you might be like, yeah, they're great, and or vice versa, right? So sometimes there's difference, but society kind of determines what's attractive or not, right? And then we just kind of know, right? And that's important to think about because a lot of the ideas about what's attractive, what is physically attractive, comes from media, right? Kind of don't learn that at home, right? You learn that kind of stuff amongst your peers and amongst media, right? And so media, of course, will sell people a particular view of what is attractive, right? Of what's desirable. And part of it is because there's a massive industry attached to this, right? Particularly for women, although increasingly for men too, but particularly for women, there's a massive industry worth, as you can see, billions of dollars here that is very motivated to sell you on a particular version of beauty, right? What do you need to be beautiful? Well, you need the right hair, the right makeup, the right clothes. You better go to the gym and get your Peloton and, go to spin classes and do juice cleanses and supplements and all of this stuff, right? That is, of course, some of it is good for your health, and of course everyone looks, when they're dressed nicely, they look good, right? And if you're in good health and good shape, people who are healthy generally look better. But they're kind of selling you on a particular version of beauty, and it's a kind of beauty that is monetized, right? That you can pay for. And, I often forget about it, but you can probably put Botox and plastic surgery into that category as well, right? There's a huge, huge industry that is based around trying to make people look more beautiful, right? And what does beauty mean? Well, they'll tell you, right? And they're never going to tell you that, women look much better with no makeup, because there's no money to be made that way, right? There is money to be made in saying that, yes, women should wear makeup, right? Here's a concealer, here's a bronzer, here's new mascara, right? Here's new lipstick, blah, 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 right? All of this stuff that, again, is meant to make you more beautiful, but also there's a lot of money involved, right? So health is good, right? Eating well is good. Wearing nice clothes that, make you look good. That's all fine. But there is a lot of marketing and social messaging centered around selling an idea of beauty and then selling you the way to get there, right? This is what beautiful is, but if you want to be there, you got to pay for it, right? And so there's a pretty big economic interest in maintaining these ideas of beauty, right? And maintaining the idea that, if you are not a 10 out of 10, right? And if you are not your ideal weight, or maybe even below your ideal weight, that somehow there's something wrong with you, right? That you are lazy or stupid or not cool or not attractive, right? Because again, if they can sell you that, then you'll spend more money, right? If you think that, oh gosh, I'm not attractive, but if I do all these things and spend all these money, I could be more attractive, then lots of people are going to spend that money, right? And again, plastic surgeons, Botox, makeup, right? Hair, clothing, fashion, gym memberships, personal trainers, supplements, protein shakes, juice cleanses, vitamins, all these things. And again, some of those things are good, right? It's good to take vitamins. I take a bunch every day, right? It's good to eat well. It's good to exercise. It's nice to wear nice clothes. It's okay to wear makeup, right? But the industry is really focused on selling you how you should look because they're going to make money, right? And if you don't follow that beauty standard, well, then you're going to be made to feel bad, right? Because that's how they're going to make money, right? If you feel bad about yourself because you're not, ridiculously beautiful, if you feel bad about yourself, then you'll spend money to try to make yourself beautiful, right? So they're setting up an idea of what beauty is, but it's not okay to be not beautiful either, right? And again, that's particularly true for women, right? There's a lot more focus on women's appearance than on men's. But we'll get to that a little bit later. So, are we okay with that? Do we want to say anything more about Tess or about the beauty industry or about anything like that? Any questions you might have or things you want to talk about? I'm open. No? Okay. Okay. So, last part is discrimination, right? So stereotype, prejudice, good morning, discrimination. And so discrimination, we said, was action that you kind of put your prejudice into action against others. Sometimes it means you do something, right? Maybe you say something to someone, or you insult them, or you tell a joke about them. Maybe you purposely exclude them, right? Maybe you don't invite them to something or don't speak to them, right? So you can kind of do things or not do things in order to discriminate, okay? Now, the example I gave you of discrimination was with a dog, right? And if I positively discriminated, I would want the dog to come over. If I negatively discriminated, I would not want the dog to come over. But let's do some real world stuff here, okay? So let's look at hiring practices, okay? If you had to get a job, how would you find a job? Internet? Where would you look on the internet? At a website? For a company? Yeah, perhaps, right? If you're looking for a job at, oh gosh, I don't know, Steve Nash Gym, right? You might go to their website and see if they have any opportunities, right? See if they have any jobs available. Where else might you go? Facebook, yeah. Sure. Facebook is a good place to sort of make connections and find people who might be looking for someone. Good. Where else might you go? There's apps that can help connect you with employers.
Yeah.
Yeah. Definitely there is. There's one that always advertises on the radio, but I can't remember what it's called. But yes. Where else might you go?
Announcement board, I guess.
Yeah.
Posters.
Sure. If you're in a place that has an announcement board, they might post it there. There's a few job websites as well, right? Like Indeed.ca, and I think there's a job finder one as well. It's not a very creative name, but that's what it does, right? So there's a few places you might look if you are trying to find a job. And once upon a time, of course, before the internet was a big deal, people would advertise in the newspaper, right? So there'd be a help wanted section of the newspaper, and companies would post ads for jobs, right? For people they were looking for. So a couple of researchers from the University of Chicago, they did a little experiment with some of these want ads or help wanted ads. And so this is the paper here. I'm not going to make you read it. Are Emily and Greg more employable than Lakeisha and Jamal? Okay, a field experiment on labor market discrimination. So this is from 2004, you can see, which is a little bit old. But there's been a number of different studies done in this kind of same way, and they sort of find a similar thing. But here's what they did, these two researchers. So they responded to about 1,300 help wanted ads in Boston and in Chicago. Okay, and these positions were kind of all across the economic spectrum, right? So it was like upper level management jobs, professional jobs, all the way, good morning, all the way down to like, dishwasher in a restaurant, or carpet cleaning guy or whatever, so jobs that required, experience and credentials and, degrees, all the way down to just kind of like entry level jobs, right? They sent resumes to a bunch of these help wanted ads, and of course the resumes were all fake, right? There was no real people. They just made them up. They made up the credentials. They made up the experience. Again, very convincing, right? So to look at it, you would think that it was, it wasn't like, Bob Boberson from 123, Road Street or something like, they actually made it seem like believable, right? And really the only difference between these resumes is that about half of them had names at the top. The name of the person was a stereotypical white person name, right? So, when you hear the name Greg Baker or Emily Walsh, those are kind of names that white people have, right? And then on the other half, the resumes, they had names that were kind of stereotypically black sounding, right? So in the States, you'll find like Jamal Jones or Lakeisha Washington. Those are kind of names that black people tend to have. There are no white people named Lakeisha Washington, I promise you, okay? So these names were kind of set up to, so that when the person read it, you kind of knew who you were dealing with, a white person or a black person. So they sent out all these resumes and kind of waited to see who would get called back for an interview, right? The white resumes or the black resumes. And what do you think happened here? 5,000 resumes sent out.
The white resumes were called.
The white ones got called back more?
Yeah.
Okay. You think so too? Why do you think so? Because what? Stereotypes, okay. Keep in mind, of course, that it is not legal to discriminate in this way, right? You cannot not call people back or not hire them because of their race or ethnicity, right? It's not legal. You may not discriminate that way in Canada and in the United States. But white people still got called back more?
Yeah.
Okay. Why do you think that happened? So Chen, you said stereotypes. Give me a little bit more. One word is never an answer, unless it's no or yes. But what do you think was going on there? Or anyone? Anna, what do you think was going on?
Because they're seen as like more intelligent or safe.
The white people would be perceived as more intelligent or safe?
Yeah.
Okay, interesting. Anna, what do you think?
I don't know, maybe they're more like, on time or something.
Maybe they're more on time?
Yeah.
Okay, interesting. So there's some stereotypes maybe about white people, and maybe that they would have more desirable characteristics.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. Why else do you think? Why else might these people have? That's so interesting. What else why did the white people get called back more often than the black people?
Maybe they still hold this belief that the black people are not efficient, I guess.
Are not what?
Efficient.
Efficient? Yeah, okay. So, yeah, maybe there's some kind of negative stereotypes or prejudices about black people, or, their work habits, right, that people still hold, right? That's possible. Anything else we can think of? Well, let me show you what happened. So, number one, your instincts are correct. Indeed, the white names did get more callbacks than the black names. And even more interesting, when they ran the experiment a second time, when they did it a second time, they actually increased the credentials or the experience of the black sounding names. And the white sounding names still got called back more often. Right? Even when the black people were technically the better choice, right? Their resume actually had more experience and credentials, they still didn't get called back as often, right? So the researchers found that when there was similar experience, similar credentials, black people got called back less, or the black names. There's no people, it's all fictional, right? When their credentials were increased, black people still got called back less often, right? And the third point is that this kind of difference, this kind of discrimination, seemed to be happening all the way across the economic spectrum. So it happened with the upper level jobs as well as the entry level jobs, and it was happening in both Chicago and Boston, right? So it's not a regional thing, it's not an economic thing. It seems to be happening all the way across society, right? And so, again, the question is, what's going on, right? There's clearly some discrimination is happening, right? Somehow white people are being called back more often than black people. It seems odd. And the question, of course, is, well, is everyone racist, right? Is that what's happening? Is it negative stereotypes? Are people looking through these resumes and saying, Jamal Jones, no thank you, right? Is that what's actually happening, right? Or are the kind of ideas we have about white people, is this working in their favor, right? Do we imagine that white people might have better work habits, right? Are we imagining that? Well, the first part is that it's likely that we're not seeing the result of kind of overt, direct discrimination, right? So I said you cannot discriminate on the basis of race or ethnicity. They cannot not hire you, and they cannot fire you because of your race or ethnicity. That is illegal. You cannot do that, right? So looking through the resumes and saying, whoa, Jamal Jones, nope, you actually can't do that, right? You can look at it and say, oh, this guy doesn't have the experience we're looking for, but you cannot exclude him because of his race. That's illegal. And I think if you talk to everyone who was looking through these resumes, all of the managers and bosses and human resource people, you would probably find that they're not actually discriminating that way, right? They're not excluding people on the basis of race. Maybe there's one or two racists in there. There always is. But it's probably not what's happening. Probably what's happening is something a little less conscious, right? A little less obvious. So this is kind of the power of socialization, right? These HR managers and bosses and sort of managers, they're discriminating, but likely in a way that they're not aware of. Okay? And so how does that work? Well, if you imagine these people looking through the resumes, right? They're looking through, and when they come across a black sounding name, what happens is it triggers a set of stereotypes, right? It triggers a set of kind of filters. And so all of a sudden, flipping through the resumes, K, and then a black sounding name comes up, suddenly all of those prejudices about black people in the US are kind of activated, right? They're kind of triggered, they're brought online. And again, this is kind of happening subconsciously. People aren't entirely aware that they're discriminating. And because they're kind of looking at this resume through the lens of these stereotypes, they're kind of, the resume doesn't look as good, right? The credentials don't look as good because they're being seen through this filter, right? And so it's interesting because I think Chen, maybe you said it, and Anna, maybe you said it as well. The idea that, oh, maybe there's these stereotypes about white people that's kind of working in their favor. But actually, it's kind of the opposite. And what happens for the white sounding names is that they kind of get seen without any filter at all. Okay? And this is another aspect of how dominant groups, the nature of dominant groups in society is that they're kind of seen as normal. They're seen as like the default. Okay? And so when someone looks at the resume of a white person, they look at it and they don't really think about a white person. They're just looking at the credentials, right? But when they see black person, suddenly triggers all these stereotypes, right? It triggers all the things we know, in quotes, we know about black people. And so they see the resume different. The resume doesn't get seen quite as, quite as objectively as the white person's, right? As an example, white people are often the default, right? So what do we have in the US, right? We have African Americans, right? We have Asian Americans, we have Jewish Americans, Italian Americans, South Asian Americans, and then we just have Americans, right? Are there any white Americans? Do we hear that very often? Caucasian Americans? Ever heard of that? No. Nobody says that, right? Because when you say Americans, they're just assumed to be white, right? When we talk off, and again, this might be different seeing as we have different cultures in the room, so this might not apply to you guys. But often here in Canada and in the West, when we're talking about someone, if I say, I was on the SkyTrain this morning and this guy came in and he sat down and he was wearing, I don't know, whatever the story is, if I don't say what his race or ethnicity is, people just assume him to be white, right? I don't actually have to specify it because, again, white people are seen as the default, right? The normal, the usual thing, right? And so if I don't specify, people think of a white person, right? If we say Americans, people generally think of white people, right? Unless you specify African Americans or Asian Americans. But again, there's no Caucasian Americans, right? So because white people are seen as default, the normal thing, right? They don't get seen the same way, right? And black people unfortunately do. And so again, it happens below the surface, right? It happens subconsciously. And so the white resumes actually look better because they're not being seen through this filter, right? Through these kind of prejudicial ideas that people have absorbed, right? So yeah, and it doesn't really work this way for white sounding names, right? Let me give you one more example of this just so you understand. Let's say, okay, here at Columbia College, we're going to start a kindergarten, okay? So we have grade 10, 11, 12, but we want all the grades, and we're going to start with kindergarten, okay? It could happen. It would make sense to work down, but but we're going to work up. So we need to hire a kindergarten teacher, and you guys are you're all on the committee to hire a new kindergarten teacher for Columbia College. Close your eyes and picture a kindergarten teacher quickly. Did you picture a woman? Yeah, you did, right? Because number one, that's kind of stereotypically true, right? Elementary teachers, kindergarten teachers, they tend to be women, right? Sometimes older, sometimes younger, often very like nurturing and friendly and bubbly, right? That's usually how kindergarten teachers are. Now, imagine we get a bunch of resumes in, right? And we're flipping through all these resumes, all these lovely women who want to work for us in our kindergarten. And then we come across the resume of a man. And suddenly, that kind of triggers a bunch of things, right? Because that's not what we expect at all, is it? That would be unexpected, I think, if a man applied for that job. I think so. There aren't very many male kindergarten teachers. It would be weird, And in fact, I don't think I've ever seen a male kindergarten teacher. So I had a male grade 1 teacher, but so that would be kind of weird, right? And so without really even thinking about it, without even being aware, most of us would probably be looking and be like, huh, what's up with this guy? Why does he want to teach kindergarten? Is he weird somehow? Right? Is he gay? Does that matter? Right? Suddenly we're having all of these kind of thoughts about this guy. We're trying to figure him out. Why is he applying to be a kindergarten teacher? Right? Why is he, how dare he, violate our stereotypical idea of what a kindergarten teacher is, right? So all of a sudden we're having all these thoughts, right? And we're thinking about it. And even if we're totally cool, right? Even if we're like, maybe that'd be all right. All of these kind of ideas and stereotypes are happening under the surface, right? And we're looking at his resume, his CV. We're looking at it totally different than those other women, right? Those other women were like, okay, looks good. Oh yeah, she went to this school. Oh, she's been teaching for 10 years. Wow. Oh, what's up with this guy, right? And suddenly we're looking at it a whole different way, right? And so it doesn't mean that he wouldn't get interviewed. Doesn't mean that he wouldn't get hired, right? He might be wonderful, might be great. But my point is we're looking at his resume through the lens of stereotypes that he's activated, right? And he's activated those stereotypes because he's not really who we expect, right? We expect a bunch of women, maybe younger, maybe older. We expect a bunch of women to apply for this position, right? And if all we got was women, if all we got was women's resumes, we probably wouldn't even question it, would we? Would anyone say, gee, I wonder why no men applied? No, you'd be like, yeah, there's no male kindergarten teachers. This is not strange at all. But when one shows up, it kind of throws us, right? It's like, oh, what's up with this guy, right? And so kind of that's what's happening here, is that because white people are the default, because they're normal, they don't get seen. They get seen just like the female kindergarten teachers, right? Okay, fine, went to this school, whatever. But black people, people who are different in this case, get seen differently, right? And it's not fair, and it's not intentional. It's not fair, it's not intentional, I don't think, in many cases, but it still happens, right? Because the experiment showed us that it happens, right? It doesn't really even seem to matter if people are trying to discriminate or not. They still do, right? And so, there we go. Yeah, and so as a result, sorry, there's a lot of text here, but I think I've covered most of this. Yeah, white people are not racialized, right? And so to be racialized is to be kind of identified as a certain race, right? So again, when we talk about African Americans or Asian Americans or African Canadians or Asian Canadians or Indigenous Canadians, we're kind of racializing those people, right? We're identifying them by their race. But again, you don't hear of Caucasian Canadians. That's probably the first time that's ever been said. It's not a thing that we say, right? Because white people aren't racialized, because they're the normal, right? We're the dominant group, we're normal, we're the default. Right? And so this was my point about Tess Holliday earlier, is that she triggered those stereotypes too, because she's not who we expect to see on the cover of Cosmo, is she? No, right? She's different, right? And so when people see her, all of a sudden they don't see her the same way as that we saw all of those other models, right? All of those other models are people who we expected, right? Slim women, right? And then we see someone who's not, and suddenly we look at her different, right? We look at her through the lens of stereotypes about people who are overweight. And I think that's what happened with Piers Morgan. I think he saw that, all of these things came up for him, and then he, critiqued it and called it concern for health, right? But I think he was expressing his prejudice because he didn't expect to see someone like Tess Holliday on the cover. Okay, let me ask you another question. This is a tricky one. This is former President Barack Obama, right? Pretty good, pretty cool guy, I think. Handsome fellow. Is he black or is he white?
Black.
He's black?
Obvious.
Obviously. Obviously. Black.
Black.
This is a black man. This is the United States' first black president that we're looking at.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. Well, I think most people would probably agree with you, right? I think that if you know anything about Barack Obama's background, you'll know that he's actually kind of a mixed race heritage, right? So his dad is from Kenya, I believe, or was from Kenya originally. His mom is white, she's from the United States. But he's always presented himself as a black man, right? That's who he identifies himself to the country as. That's his identity, right, as a black man. You know, visually nobody really questions him on that, right? He looks like a black man, and so case closed, right? But not really. So another study done. A bunch of college kids came in. They didn't really know why they were there for this psychology test, but they were shown a bunch of pictures of former President Barack Obama, bunch of different pictures of him, and those pictures had been kind of filtered or edited slightly so that his skin tone was a little bit different in each one. Okay, so in some of the pictures they darkened his skin just a little bit. In some pictures they lightened it just a little bit. Okay, so not enough to be ridiculous, right? Not so anyone would say, oh, that's fake, right? Just enough to make it a little different but still believable. Okay, and so they asked these participants in the study, which picture do you think represents Barack Obama best? Okay, and so everyone would say, okay, I think this is the best representation of him. And so an interesting pattern occurred here. They took a little more information from all these people too, and I'll get to that in a second. What they found was that not everyone picked the same picture. Okay, number one. So people disagreed slightly about the true color of Barack Obama's skin. Okay, here we can see it looks to be a lovely caramel color here, but whatever. But not only did people not choose the same picture, so they kind of disagreed about what color he was, but there was a pattern in how people chose their picture. Okay, so some people tended to choose pictures that showed him with a darker skin tone. Some people tended to choose pictures of him showing a lighter skin tone. And what happened, that shouldn't say sin, that should say skin, sorry, that's a typo, is that it seemed to align with the politics of the students. Okay, so if you know anything about politics in the US, you'll know there's the Democrats and the Republicans, right? Democrats are kind of left-wing liberal, the Republicans are kind of right-wing conservative. And the Democrat liberal students tended to choose pictures of Obama where he seemed to have lighter skin. And so Obama was a liberal, Obama was a Democrat. So people of the same kind of political leanings as Obama tended to choose pictures that were lighter. People who disagreed with Obama, people who didn't have the same kind of political ideas, tended to choose pictures of him that were darker. Very interesting, right? And apparently the researchers said that this actually works even if it's not a famous person. Similar tests will kind of show this. And even regardless of political views, people who liked Obama, right? So even if you were a Republican or a conservative, and you're like, I don't agree with his politics, but I think he's a good guy, I like him. Even those people were likely to choose a lighter colored picture of him. Well, that's weird, isn't it? The man is only one color, is he not? Whatever color he is, his skin is only one color. What's going on, right? And so, yeah.
But he was the president, so
He was their president.
yes.
So,
They would more likely want
Why?
Because white is good.
Because white is good?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, don't laugh, because you're actually, that's actually an explanation that the author of this study used, right? So here's what he said. Eugene Caruso was the psychologist who did the study. And he said, this is what I think is happening here. This is why I think we see the pattern that we do. There's two biases or two stereotypes working. One is that there are, exactly what Avatej said, there are positive associations with whiteness and lightness, right? Why do you think that is? Dominant group is white, right? People in power are white, so of course they control social messaging, right? Lots of our heroes are white, right? So you're correct. There are positive associations with whiteness and lightness, and there's a tendency to view people in the same group as us in a positive way, right? So part of this is that Tajfel's social identity theory, right? If we're part of a group, we want that group to sort of be good and well respected, because that means if we're part of the group, we'll be well respected too, right? And so we want to see members of our group as good, right? As like us. And so Eugene Caruso says there's kind of two things going on here, but so interesting, right? Because the beliefs you hold, not only the stereotypes, right? The stereotype of whiteness and lightness being positive, but your political views as well literally change how you see the world, right? People literally saw Obama differently depending on their political values and depending on whether they actually liked him as a person or not, which is wild, right? Because again, the man is only one color, right? Maybe if he goes to Hawaii on vacation and gets a bit of a tan, but for the most part, he's from Hawaii, right? For the most part, yeah, he always used to go, like I think once a year he'd go on vacation to Hawaii because that's where he used to live. But anyway, the man is only one color, but people literally see him differently based on how they feel about him. If they see someone who, yes, I like him, I think he's cool, his politics are kind of aligned with my politics, if that's the case, they tend to see him as lighter. And if they disagree with him or if they don't like him, tend to see him as darker. Again, because of this underlying stereotypical idea of whiteness being seen as a positive thing, which again is just unbelievable, right? Because again, we like to think we're looking at reality, right? We like to think that we see things objectively, right? But this study pretty clearly shows us that that's not the case. We literally are seeing this guy as a different color based on how we feel about him. And to be honest, I would love to do, I don't think it would work now because I know about the study, but I would love to have done this experiment myself, because I'd be curious to know what, because I do like him. I think he's cool, but I wonder what picture I would choose. But yeah, people, in the last example, people were discriminating based on stereotypes. They were probably doing it without knowing, right? And here they definitely were, right? Because they had no idea, these study participants had no idea what they were doing, right? They were just, choose a picture. So they chose one. They didn't know what was going on. And so here, our prejudices, right, our ideas that we have, that we've absorbed, change the way we see the world. And they change the decisions we make too, right? They change the way we see Barack Obama. They change the way we hire people, right? And again, that's why we have to keep an eye on those social messages and stereotypes, because again, once we absorb them, they're kind of like a computer virus, right? Or malware. They're kind of operating in the background, and we don't really know what they're doing. We don't know how they're affecting the way our computer works. And so we need to pay attention to what we believe, right? We need to kind of dig deep to see how we feel about things, because they do they do have an impact, right? And with that hiring study, clearly did, right? even even in cases where the resumes with the black sounding names, even where they had better credentials, they were the better candidate, right? They were the one who should have gotten hired. They still didn't. Right? And actually, because of that, a lot of companies are doing it so that before the HR manager looks at the resumes, they actually remove all the names from them. So you can't actually tell, you can't even tell gender either, for that matter. So if we were looking through our kindergarten teacher resumes, we wouldn't know if we were dealing with a man or a woman until they came in for an interview, right? And similarly, people looking through resumes wouldn't know if they were doing an interview with a black person or a white person. All they would know is that this is the person with the experience and the credentials that we want. So yeah, there's ways that companies have tried to sort of minimize that discrimination, but it happens, right? And again, it doesn't mean that everyone is racist, right? Because everyone is not, right? But people are affected by the social messages they absorb, and they do act on that sometimes. They make decisions, right? And they may not even realize that they're discriminating. But studies like this show us that, yeah, they are, right? It's happening. Even though people might not be trying to, they might be actively trying not to, but sometimes it still happens anyway. Okay, people, you want to take a little break? Yeah? All right. Let's take a break. Come back. We'll talk about privilege, okay? Okay, ready, people? All good? Okay. So, two examples here, the resume study and I guess the Barack Obama study, showing us that discrimination happens, right? And more importantly, not only does it happen, but it happens when people aren't really aware of it, right? It's one thing to discriminate, right? If to say, yes, I'm not hiring this person because they're of this race or this ethnicity, or I'm not hiring this person because they're a man or because they're a woman. But most of the time, that's not the way discrimination happens, right? Sometimes people overtly discriminate even though it's illegal and you're not supposed to do it and it's bad. Some people do it, but more often it's happening when people aren't aware of it, right? And this is one aspect of oppression, right? I said that oppression wasn't about what individual people did, it's about how society works, right? And this is kind of one of those aspects. It's one of the ways that society works. There's social messages floating around, we absorb them, and then we make decisions based on them, right? And sometimes we don't know that we're making a decision based on it, right? And so because of that, that's one of the things that makes kind of prejudices and discrimination so tricky, is because it's easy to call someone out and say, hey, you're discriminating, stop that. But a lot of times it's just not that visible, right? It's not that obvious. And sometimes the people who wind up doing it aren't actually intending to do it in the first place, right? They might be trying not to, but then they wind up doing it anyway. So, question for you. Do you remember any examples of discrimination from Mean Girls, right? So this is where people were treated differently because of who they were or because of stereotypes about who they were or what groups they belonged to. So maybe what I'm going to give you just a few minutes here. I'm going to put some time on the counter, just 3 minutes. Talk to each other. Try to come up with a few examples of discrimination in Mean Girls, okay? Places where people were treated differently, included or excluded, given something or not given something because of stereotypes or because of prejudices, okay? This might be a little tricky because I know Mean Girls is a little in the rearview mirror right now, but see if you can come up with a few examples, okay? Go. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, people. So, what do you think? What'd you come up with? Okay, so to join the mathletes was social suicide. The mathletes were seen as kind of low on the totem pole. Let's see, is that? I guess that's kind of a prejudice. There is something to do with the mathletes. Oh. Oh, so the mathletes were racially or ethnically from.
Like they're seen as clever people.
Right. Interesting. So I guess, yeah, they kind of use some stereotypes there in sort of choosing which actors would be part of the mathletes, right? And so
India is good at math. Because the guy was from India, he looked like.
Kevin Napur,
I forgot his name.
yeah, the head guy kind of thing. Yeah, Kevin Napur was from India, right? Or his ancestors were anyway. Yeah, and maybe, who knows? Maybe there was some discrimination going on in, letting people into the mathletes, right? And sort of choosing, people who are stereotypically good at math, right? What else? Other examples?
For example, like the plastic group, and this is kind of in the movie, especially in the movie around 2000, before 2010.
Yeah.
The beauty white ladies in the Hollywood movie, they are all stupid. They're all foolish.
Right. Okay, so there's there is a stereotype about yeah, like the pretty dumb girl.
Yes.
Yeah, and Karen is definitely that, right? She's a dummy, and Gretchen kind of is too, right? Not to the same degree,
Yes.
but she's not. You don't get the idea that Gretchen is super smart, right? She
Maybe she's not Christian.
well, she looks. I don't know, but that's a stereotype for sure. But what about like in terms of like joining the plastics, what do you need to be?
Pretty.
Pretty,
Rich.
rich. What's that?
Stylish.
I mean,
Stylish.
Did you say it's stylish? Yeah, for sure, right? You have to be all of those three things. So, do the plastics discriminate in terms of who they invite into their group?
Yeah.
Yeah, they do. Why do they invite Katie in? Is she stylish?
No.
Is she rich?
No.
Is she pretty?
Yeah.
Right. So she's pretty, right? And so I think they kind of figure, well, we'll make her in our image, right? We'll make her over into us, right? But so they kind of positively discriminate towards Katie, right? They invite her into the group strictly because she's pretty, right? That's good. What else do we see in terms of discrimination or prejudice or stereotypes in Mean Girls? What else do we see?
Sexual discrimination.
What's that?
Sexual discrimination.
Sexual? How so do we see sexual discrimination?
When the book was up or something.
Mm-hmm. When the book was out?
Yeah.
Okay.
Like the principal couldn't handle it. He asked the lady teacher to talk to them.
Right. So yeah, he was. Okay. How can we think about that? Yeah. So it was definitely a problem that was affecting the girls of the school, right? So the girls created this book. It was all about the other girls. The girls rioted when they read what was in the book, and they were all in the gym. He was going to keep them there all night, and he was going to keep them there until 4. Yeah, and then it's okay. So the principal was going to try and talk to these girls, but then there was a menstrual problem, and he was like, "Oh, that's it, I'm out." And then he tags in Miss Norbury, right? I guess maybe there's a stereotype there in that like guys like can't handle those kind of topics, right? So as soon as the one girl started talking about her menstrual flow, he was like, "Oh man, I'm out," right? So that's kind of a stereotypical thing to do, right? For men to kind of be squeamish about that and just kind of tap out and say, "Okay, I can't deal with that," right? Which, suck it up, dude. What about why is Katie asked to join the mathletes in the first place? Do you remember? Kevin Napur comes up to her and he's like, "Hey," he's all cool, "you should join the mathletes." What does he say? Do you remember? No, well, Damien says it's social suicide, but Kevin Napur, he gives Katie his card, right? Math enthusiast, badass MC, right? So gives her his card. Why does he want her to join? It's a small detail. She definitely. So, well, there's a little discrimination there, right? In that he's inviting her because she's good at math, positively discriminating. It makes sense, right? But he's also inviting her because no, because what? Yeah, there's no girls, and he's like, yeah, if we get, he says we get extra funding if we get a girl, and we want jackets this year, right? So he's positively discriminating against her because she's good at math, which you would understand, right? It's the mathletes. But also, he's discriminating in favor of her because she's a girl, right? He's specifically asking her because she's a girl because they'll get more funding, they'll get more money, and then they can buy jackets, right? So, positive discrimination, right? He's specifically choosing her. Not only is she good at math, but because she's a girl. He discriminates a little bit later in the movie too. Do you remember what Kevin Napur says? It's when he hears that Katie might have a crush on him. She doesn't, but he hears that, right? And what does he say to her? Do you remember? Sorry, I know this is hard. I've seen this movie like 10 times, so I can pretty much recite it, beginning to end. But do you know what he says? He's like, sorry, I only date women of color. Right? He's discriminating, right? He does not date white girls. He dates only women of color, right? Again, whether you're allowed to discriminate that way is, that's up to you to decide, but Kevin does, right? He's not dating her because she's white, right? Other reasons too, probably, but he discriminates that way, right? What else is there? Do we get anything else? I know it's tough. I know it's tough to remember back that far. Let me suggest a few to you, and if they trigger something else, then you can let me know. Huh?
How about like when Ellie first come to the class
Uh-huh.
and she introduced her as African,
Yeah.
African, and her friend said you are white,
Yeah.
you come from Africa, you are white, right?
Yeah. There's a little stereotype there, right? The idea that everyone from Africa is black, right? And so when one of the plastics, Karen, finds out that she's from Africa, she's like, why are you white? And so, you can't just ask people why they're white. But yeah, there's a little stereotype there, right? And they get a laugh out of that stereotype a little earlier in the movie too. Do you remember? Katie's first day in the classroom. And Miss Norbury finds out she has a new student from Africa in her class, and she looks at the one black student, and she's like, "Oh, welcome." And the student's like, "I'm from Michigan." So, yeah, so that stereotype comes up a lot, right? That, if you're black, you must be from Africa, and well, I guess ancestrally you are, and if you're from Africa, you must be black, right? But both of those stereotypes are proven wrong, right? Katie's white and she's from Africa, and the girl in the class is from Michigan, right? Yeah, so the first one, we got that one already, right? The idea that Katie is invited to sit with the plastics and then to join them because she's pretty, right? Because she's a girl as well, that's part of it, but because she's pretty, right? She's asked to join the mathletes because she's a girl, right? Again, those are positive discrimination, right? She's getting brought into a group because of who she is, right? This is a minor detail, but remember, this is why Janice hates Regina, right? She said Janice and Regina were friends, right? Years ago. And then Janice wasn't invited to a pool party because Regina thought she was a lesbian. And she's like, it's a pool party and I can't have a lesbian with all these girls, right? And so she discriminated against Janice because she thought she was a lesbian, right? Is she? Was Janice a lesbian? I don't think so, right? It doesn't really come up, but she's dancing with Kevin Napur at the spring fling at the end, right? So maybe not, right? Maybe that's just a rumor. Although, interestingly, I think that was the joke, right? When Kevin Napur, he's like, "Oh, what are you, Puerto Rican?" And she's like, "Lebanese," which kind of sounds like lesbian. So I mean, I think maybe that's a joke. She's not lesbian, she's Lebanese, from Lebanon. The store. Remember the store they go to? And Regina's dress she can't get it to zip up because she's eating all those bars. That store is called 135, right? And if you know your dress sizes, you'll know that 1, 3, and 5 are pretty small dress sizes, right? The average woman is not a 1 or a 3 or a 5. Maybe closer to a 5, but definitely not a 1 or a 3, right? So you've got to be pretty slim, pretty tiny to fit into a 1, 3, or 5, right? And of course, when the dress won't zip up, Regina's like, well, this can't be. What do I do? And the saleswoman's like, well, you can go to Sears. And
What is that?
Sears? Sears is like a department store, and not a very nice one. It's like going to, it'd be like going to Target or to Walmart. So you can check Walmart, and Regina's like, she's horrified, right? But that store discriminates, right? They do not stock clothing for women that are larger than a size 5. And again, a good proportion of women are greater than a size 5. Right? So yeah, they discriminate too. Kevin Napur, I only date women of color, right? That's discriminatory, right? Again, whether he's allowed to do that is another question, but he still discriminates. Did I miss anything? Did we miss anything? No? Okay. Tell you what, let's leave it for now. We'll press pause on that. I'll hand back your quizzes. We'll review them, and then I'll let you go. Julio? Okay. Okay. Where are they now? Here they are. Okay. All right. So Chen is here. Sorry about that. Arena. Costco is behind me, and Aria. Leo. Here. Okay. So let's go through this quickly. How do I do this? Well, I'm always looking for I'm looking for the right words. I'm looking for you to tell me exactly what I want to hear, or I want you to tell me enough so that I can kind of read between the lines and say, okay, this person understands. Okay. So sometimes it's directly about what you say, right? So for question 1 for socialization, if you say, the exact thing from my slides, I can't argue with you, right? It's there, check, right? If you can't remember exactly the words, or you didn't want to study that way, that's okay too, as long as you can explain it to me in a way that, convinces me that you get it, right? So even if you don't say the exact words I said in the slide, that's fine. And actually, I'd almost prefer it that you don't. But I want to read something and say, okay, does this person get it? If I ask them to clarify something, would I like what I hear? Right? So a bit of it is, are you saying the exact thing? But if you don't say the exact thing, I'm trying to I want to get the feeling that you know what we're talking about, okay? And so, that's kind of my approach with students who, for whom English is maybe their second or third language sometimes. I have to read between the lines sometimes to find what I'm looking for, right? So I'm always trying to look and see, do they get it, right? Do they understand what this thing is, okay? And again, if you can explain it to me in a way that convinces me that you get it, then great, right? If it's not quite there, then I give you less marks, okay? So you don't have to say the exact thing that I've said in my slides, and actually I'd kind of like it if you don't. If you do, I can't argue with you. But I'm always trying to see, do Do they understand this thing? Do they get it? Okay. So, socialization, what did we say that was? The process of systematic training of beliefs and values and norms in the society that we are born into, right? Or something like that, right? So I want to hear about, the sort of the training, the learning of beliefs and values and norms, learning the rules that society wants us to follow, something like that. Okay, so some of you said, something close to what I had in the slides. Some of you said, your own words. But if you got there, then that was great, okay? Number 2, George was double dipping the chip. Timmy stepped up and got upset. What was happening there in kind of sociological terms? Well, double dipping the chip is breaking a social norm, right? It was breaking a social norm. It was breaking a social rule, right? Don't double dip your chip, right? And so what did Timmy do? Timmy stood up and tried to get George to follow the rule, right? He explained that no, you can't do that. Stop it, right? This is the correct way. Take one dip, take one dip and end it, right? That's what he said. So he's trying to correct George, right? He's trying to get George to follow the social rule. And again, we often do that, right? We have social rules, we establish them, and we try to get other people to follow them, right?
I thought it was value about belief.
You thought it was what?
Value or belief.
Oh, probably not. Not for that one, probably. What does it mean to recognize your own social positionality, and how does your positionality influence your perspective? You guys said lots of different things here. I think most of them were pretty good. That, your class or the social group you belong to, right? Your gender, your age, your sexuality, your race, your religion, all of those kind of determine the perspective from which you see society, right? And how you see society differs depending on where you kind of sit. And of course, society will treat you a little bit differently as well, right? Because we treat people differently, right? And we all belong to different social categories. Social norms, I think that was an easy one. Things that are behaviors that are considered normal in society, or social rules that we have, like shaking hands when we meet or whatever. That was a pretty easy one. Most people got that. And then Regina, again, we see a rule was created. There was a social rule. The rule was broken and she was punished for it, right? And so I think I gave you full marks for that, but some of you went above and beyond and said the other part of it is that even though a rule is arbitrary and made up, and maybe even doesn't make any sense, right? Even if it's a meaningless, stupid rule, if everybody believes it, then it will have real consequences, right? And so for Regina, wearing her sweatpants, that's a dumb rule, right? Who cares, right? It doesn't matter what you wear. But the plastics were like, you can't sit with us, right? And they enforced it, and it was a big deal, right? It was humiliating for Regina to be kicked out of her table, right? And you saw in the film, her social status kind of dropped immediately, right? That other girl bumped into her and she's like, watch where you're going. And she never would have said that before. But, as soon as she was outside of her little protective bubble, she lost some status, right? So again, there was the social rule, the breaking of the rule, the punishment for it, and the idea that even though social rules might be arbitrary or made up or just, not have any real importance, they still can have an effect on people when they break those rules, okay? So yeah, overall, I think this was pretty good. It occurs to me though, on the break, I forgot to do something. I forgot to enter this in my spreadsheet. And so now that you've looked at it, can I ask you to hand them back into me so I can enter them in, so I can enter your grades into the world of computers? Can you do that for me?
I
You don't have to, otherwise I'll just give you a 0 because I don't know what you got. But yeah, hand it back to me, please, and I'll give it back. I'll hand it back to you on Monday. I just need to enter it. Or did I do it? Oh no, I did it. It's okay. I did it. It's
What?
okay. You can keep it. You can keep it.
I didn't.
Yeah, I did it. Sorry, I did it and forgot. Usually it's the other way around. Usually I think I did something and then it's like, oh no, I didn't. But only rarely do I actually think I didn't do it and then I did it. Okay, that is all for today. Good people, you can pack it up. For those of you who are off, I will see you on Monday. Have a great weekend. And some of you I'll see in, well, a little more than 20 minutes because we're going to have a quiz, right? So, bye, Cleo. See you Monday.
So what time do we start?